So every summer I have a bunch of new kokanee anglers stumble into my channel and find my content, and they go down that rabbit hole of starting to watch all these videos, and they get a little bit overwhelmed by the diversity of dodgers and kokanee lures out there. And so I always get the question like, what's the best like starter set? Where should I start? It can be a little bit intimidating. So if we look even, here I have my little tackle kit here. I open this up and I've got, all these different packs of lures on leaderboards. And, I got squids, I've got spinners, I've got hoochies, I've got just all kinds of stuff. It can be overwhelming. And then, especially when you start digging into dodgers, you start seeing all these different shapes and colors and styles of dodgers, and it just starts to get overwhelming. So today what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over the basics of kokanee dodgers and lures and what I would recommend for a beginner setup. So we'll do like if you just want to get 3 dodgers to start and like 5 lures, what should you do? Or if you want to do like 5 and 7. So today we're just going to do an in-depth dive into dodger shape and action and lure shape and action, and then we'll talk briefly about color as well. All right, let's get started. Okay, so there's just too many different brands, models, and shapes and weights of dodgers out there for me to go through all of these one by one. So what we're going to do is we come inside. I'm going to work on my top of my chest freezer here because it's a nice big open space I can use as a marker board. The role of a dodger is to, at first, it's to create a flash that attracts fish from a distance. They can do that through reflective tape, through the base metal and the reflection off that itself, and then also through a variety of paint and tape patterns that may or may not glow. Now, when it comes to dodger colors, there's pretty much an infinite variety out there. They all come in. You can have different base metals like gold or steel or nickel underneath. You can even have copper, and then you can use tapes and paints, and like I said, some glow. Generally I'm going to stick with those reds and oranges and pinks, and I'm fishing in the top 20-30 foot of the water column, and then I'm going to start transitioning to orange, yellow, and green as I go deeper down towards 30 and 50 feet, and then deeper than 50 feet it'll be green, purple, blue, plus I do like some glow component at depth. And also in those early morning hours. So think about what depths you're going to be fishing at more in your local lakes. Do you tend to fish there more in the spring? Do you fish there in the summer? Or is it one of those lakes where the kokanee are always deep? So think about that when selecting your dodger colors and patterns and paints, whether or not they glow. And that will help guide your decision in terms of color. So dodgers have fundamentally 3 roles. The first is to create flash to attract fish from a distance. The second is in that motion they create vibrations in the water which can excite the lateral line of fish. So especially in those darker situations where the fish may not have a lot of light, that can be critical. And then lastly, dodgers also add action to whatever lure you're trolling behind the dodger itself. So I think you can safely break dodgers into 2 different groups with an intermediate in between in terms of action. And that is the wide and slow wobble, and then there's going to be the fast and tight wobble, and then there's going to be intermediate. So this is like comparing these 2 dodgers, which fundamentally have very much a similar color pattern, but they have very different shapes. So the wider a dodger is, especially in proportion to its length, the wider and slower the wobble will be. And the heavier a Dodger is, the slower its wobble will be. So this is a very heavy, almost 2-ounce Dodger. And this is a very light, probably less than ½ ounce, probably a 1/4 ounce or less Dodger. This one is going to have a wide, slow wobble. This is going to have much tighter, fast wobble. So again, it's this width relative to length and overall weight. So this is a J&K Tackle Chub Dodger. It's probably the widest, slowest wobble of any Kokanee Dodger that I run. So it fits firmly in this wide and slow category. Now there's a lot of Dodgers in this category, and they all fundamentally have this same either raindrop or egg shape, where they typically have a very wide base or some wide points along the Dodger. You'll see just many brands. They're all fundamentally going to have very similar actions. This one's a little bit heavier than the Finn McFaddy, so it's going to have a wider, slower wobble than this one. There's so many Kokanee brands out here producing Dodgers in this wide, slow wobble category. What's great about all of these is they don't require any tuning, so you don't have to bend anything to make them work. And they don't tend to skate on the surface if you're flatlining in the spring, so you can just let the line out and they'll dive down. They won't end up skating up on top of the water. So these are a really good choice, especially in the spring. When flatlining, when targeting fish in cold water, when targeting fish in deep water, these are my favorites. Now let's go down to this other extreme. Now we had a good example here. This is a skateboard Dodger. Now this has a very fast, tight wobble. This is one from Gibbs. But there's also an effect as you increase the overall size of a basic Dodger design. So as skateboards get longer and bigger and heavier, then they're going to slow down in their wobble, right? So, this one's a Nebo skateboard Dodger, slightly bigger than the Gibbs. So it's going to have not quite as fast and tight a wobble. And then this really big one here from Christensen's that I put my own tape on. This one is going to be, closer to a wide and slow wobble because it's so big, it's so heavy. I mean, it's approaching the width of some of these ones up here. So you can still achieve a different type of action with the same shape depending on the size and weight of that Dodger. Likewise with what traditionally have been called teardrop Dodgers, which is not really a great name. Sometimes people refer to these as sling blades because it's one of the first brands that made them with Shasta Tackle, and they called them sling blades and became very popular. A lot of brands, and pretty much every brand out there has some sort of Dodger that's this shape. Now these ones are really tough for beginners because they do require tuning. You see how they're bent? You can run them flat, but then they tend not to have a lot of action. They tend to get the best action when they're bent just right, and it takes time to bend them and get that figured out. Some manufacturers send them pre-bent, others you have to bend yourself. So they're not my favorite Dodger for beginners, but they are widely available. A lot of popular companies, like at Sportsman's Warehouse and stuff, you'll see selling these. They're just flat sold, so they're not tuned well, and so they don't offer the best action straight out of packaging. You have to tune them. But they come in a lot of different sizes and weights from a lot of different companies. So, a larger, 5.5 inch one here can be more on the intermediate side versus a smaller 4.5 inch one. It's going to be more on the fast and tight end. And then alternatively, you get something like the Gibbs Dogtail Dodger here, which has this more raindrop pattern, but it's sort of in between, right? It's transitioning. It's not quite as wide relative to its length as a lot of these Dodgers are. You can see it's plainly is skinnier, even at its widest point. And so, this is going to be moving down into that intermediate. And this is nice because you get a good action out of it, and it doesn't require tuning, so you get a little bit faster and tighter. Or alternatively, you get something like the MK3 Dodger from J&K, which is a very unique shape with very strong bends in it. comes pre-bent, doesn't require tuning, and this has a very fast and tight wobble, reminiscent of a well-tuned teardrop dodger, and that's why I really like this MK3 dodger for beginners, because there's literally no tuning required, and you get this really nice fast and tight wobble, which I really like, especially during prime kokanee season when these fish are feeding, 20 to 50 feet, holding a heart on that thermocline. That's just one of my favorite actions. So if I was going to make recommendations on what to buy, I'm not going to go through and just say you have to buy this brand and this model to start out, because you may not have that available at your local tackle shop. If you go online, then you have a ton of choices. But if you were just going to buy 3 dodgers, I would just recommend starting with 1 wide and slow, 1 intermediate, and 1 fast and tight. I might change these recommendations if you're somebody who mostly just targets kokanee in the spring when it's cold, then you might want to go more with the wide and slow. If you're somebody who mostly just fishes later in the summer, then maybe you want more of the fast and tight wobbles. If you're somebody fishing very deep, like deeper than 50 feet, then maybe you want the wide and slow. Or you can always just take the safe road and fish these intermediates. If I was going to get 5, maybe you can split your preferences here. This is just a video for folks getting started out. And this is where if you're going to go out and buy 5 dodgers, which is a pretty significant investment. I mean, most of these run more than $10 a piece. You're going to be looking at investing, $50 plus. This is where I'm going to look at what time of year do I plan on fishing more. If I'm more of a summer kokanee angler, I might go 3 fast and tight, 1 intermediate, 1 slow, or I might inverse that if I'm somebody who fishes much deeper and more in the spring as well. If I'm fishing across a broader season, it really just depends on your lake. Like if I'm somebody who just fishes Chelan religiously, I'm going to go predominantly with wide and slow wobble and maybe just 1 fast and tight. So I hope that's a good starting point for your dodgers. Now let's transition into talking about lures. Oh, and before I transition to talking about lures, I did forget, I wanted to mention there is another dodger design out there that is long and skinny that doesn't require tuning, and that's this Cyclops dodger here from Nebo. There are several companies with similar dodger designs to this. This one doesn't need to be tuned, it's quite heavy, but it also has that really tight wobble. So you can see it approaches a teardrop dodger in a lot of ways, but doesn't need to be bent because of this little inflection point in the middle here. It will go side to side really tight and have a good fast tight wobble, but you don't need to tune it. Alright, so now let's talk about lures. What are we going to run behind these dodgers? And again, we're going to break these up into 2 categories with an intermediate in between. There's going to be high action lures and low action, or no action lures, I should say. And then intermediate. All of these can be paired with a dodger. You just have to pair them appropriately at the right leader length. So the no action lures are a lot of your classic lures. These are going to be things like squids, little hoochies. I always carry a whole variety of these. So for example, on this board here, I've got several no action lures. I just have a lot of squids from J&K Tackle and various hoochies of different sizes and colors. Okay, so these are sort of the classic kokanee lure. But then at the other extreme end, we're going to have things like this Tasmanian devil lure. It's got big fins. It has a very erratic action. So down here on these low action lures, I'm going to be running 6 to 10 inch leaders, really tight. The dodger imparts the action on these no action lures. They don't need to generate their own action. They're relying on the dodger to do it. So they tend to be smaller, lighter weight lures with very short leaders. The dodger imparts the action for these lures here. Whereas the high action lures have their own action, so you want to give them long leaders of anywhere from 12 to 24 inches in length behind the dodger. So this would be things, like I said, like the Tasmanian Devil Lure, the Pro Troll, Kokanee Killer Spoons. There's a bunch of companies with spoons like this. Brad's Kokanee Cut Plugs are a very high action lure, and Wiggle Hoochies as well. So this is a hoochie, which is normally just an inert lure with a wiggle bill applied, and that creates a high action. And then there's the intermediates. Now these ones I tend to run on shorter leaders than the high action lures, but you can go with longer leader lengths and sometimes have great success. So these are the things that they have some action built in, but they aren't necessarily moving side to side a lot. They mostly rotate. So this would be things like your classic spinners, like wedding rings. You can also do the same thing with a hoochie with a smiley blade on it. But again, you can see I'm running a tight leader here, so about 10 inches. Or these salmonoid rotating lures here, which are basically a harder plastic rotating hoochie. So these are the intermediates. And all of these will catch kokanee if they're paired with the right dodger and the right leader length. In general, as the weight of my lure goes up, so like this is the heavy lure. Here you can tell the Tasmanian Devil Lure, it's got some lead built into it. It's a little bit weighty. You can do two things here. You can put it behind a heavier dodger, so like the chub dodgers or something like that. These wider, slower action dodgers, which tend to weigh more, it'll be able to throw this lure around a little more. Or you can just give it a really long leader length, and that gives it the freedom to move on its own and make more action on its own. So the longer this leader length gets, the more freedom it is, but of course then you're putting distance between your attractor and your lure. So there can be a balance there. Whereas these smaller, lighter, lures, you run them behind a dodger and they'll get thrown around nicely. But again, I'm still going to even consider the weight and mass and drag of these different lures. So we look at this glow squid from J&K. This is a larger lure than this hoochie from Kokanee Tackle, right? So the drag on this is going to be a lot higher. It's heavier, it's bigger, it's bulkier. So I'll want to run this behind a slightly larger dodger than this one if I want to maximize the action, right? So if I have a small, like 4.5 inch dodger, then I'm probably gonna, pair it with a very small, lightweight lure. Whereas, J&K, their dodgers are heavier, and so they can afford to run a heavier lure with more drag behind it because their dodgers can compensate because they have enough weight. So, you have to think about leader length, and you have to think about, what's your dodger? Is it capable of throwing around a heavier lure? And pairing that up correctly. And then colors, it's going to be much the same rules as before. Reds, oranges, pinks for that top 20, 30 foot of the water column, transitioning to more orange, yellows, and greens in 30 to 50 foot range. And then 50 foot deeper, I'm going to be blues, purples, and greens. So how I would approach this would be, if you're buying, say, 3 dodgers and you want to get 5 lures, I'm going to split it. I'm going to go 2 no action lures, 2 high action lures, and 1 intermediate. If you're buying, say, 7 lures, then I'm going to shift it to what kind of dodgers I have and really dial that in. So if I have a lot of bigger, heavier dodgers, probably going to go more on the intermediate to high action end. If I have a lot of small, dainty dodgers, then I'm going to go more towards the intermediate and no action. So I might do something like just keep 2 high action lures and go to 2 intermediates and 3 no action lures, and that's going to give me 7 lures to start, right? So just kind of think about what you buy and tying that in, and then, like I said, the colors, you're just going to think about the depths that you're primarily targeting. All right, I'll put links below to my favorite slow, wide wobble dodgers, intermediate dodgers, and fast action type wobble dodgers, and likewise same with high action, intermediate, no action lures. All right, folks, I hope that helps clear it up a little bit. I know it's a little bit overwhelming. It's like going to the spaghetti sauce aisle at the grocery store. It can just be ridiculous how much there is to choose from, but there is a lot of advantage to having that sort of selection because you will find just certain tackle works better at your lakes. But honestly, I've found that if you can get that right depth, right troll speed, and good scented bait down there, you're probably going to catch fish no matter what type of gear you get down there. There's just going to be subtle variations day to day on what works. All right, I'll see you next time. Just remember, fish smarter, not harder. Bye, guys.